So I would just obviously like to thank the speakers who, for the first session, and they set the scene for the Irish situation, if you like, and now we're moving towards Europe. We're turning around and we're looking towards Europe. So I don't want to steal your thunder, Roisin, but I would like to welcome Roisin Doherty to facilitate this particular session for me, for us. And I am going to stop sharing my screen, Roisin, so you can have the floor, and you can work away on this for the next session with our other speakers. So
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and delighted as well to have attended this event last year. I find it extremely informative, and it's great this year to be doing it for me from the comfort of your own home. So delighted to join everybody here today. I'm not really going to say too much because I'm really looking forward to our two speakers, and as Angela said, we're looking to focus on Europe. And we'll have our two speakers. We'll roughly go to about 12 o'clock, and that will include some Q&As as well, which will be facilitated by Barbara, and then we'll finish up for some feedback and close. So the first speaker that we have, and Anthony is there, I can see him on the camera, is Anthony Camilleri, and we're delighted to have you on board here today. Really looking forward to this presentation as an expert, external expert joining us here this morning. I suppose you're the team leader for digital credentials, part of the Europass, which you're working with your parent company, Knowledge Information Centre, and you've been contracted by the European Commission to work on this very, very exciting project. And I know you are based in Malta and Slovenia. And not only, I suppose, are you involved in the whole area of the Europass and the digital credentials, but you have a background in quality assurance, which is very, very interesting to us all. Open learning and educational management. So really, I'm not going to say any more. I'd just like to welcome you very much here today, and we look forward to hearing all about this exciting new approach to digital credentials across Europe. So Anthony, if it's okay with you, I'll turn off my camera and hand over to yourself. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the invitation. I must say I'm very sorry that I couldn't make it to Ireland to speak to you in person, but so are the times. I will be presenting this within the framework of the wider policy on the European approach to micro-credentials. So, as some of you might know, the EU launched a general approach to micro-credentials this December, which involved publishing a set of reports, the most important of which was the results of a consultation group that was put together to look at what actions the Commission and the Union could take in the area of micro-credentialing in higher education. And that expert group was running between May and October last year, which resulted in the publication of this report. Backing up the report is also a background paper, which looks at, let's say, the overview of what's happening in Europe. Another background paper that looks like at institutional incentives for developing micro-credentials, and also a report from the network of experts on economics of education. Put all that together, and what it resulted in is, first of all, a definition of micro-credentials. And the definition is important because it defines the scope of action of what the European Union wants to promote. And under this definition of micro-credentials, the micro-credential is the proof of learning outcomes that a learner has acquired following a short learning experience. It also requires that these learning outcomes have been assessed against transparent standards. So right there off the bat, with the definition of micro-credentials, we're only talking about assessed learning. If we're talking about learning that only gives you a participation certificate or a MOOC that tells you have participated but doesn't actually assess you, it doesn't fall within the definition of micro-credentials. As we move further down, we also see that there are a few other characteristics. First of all, that the proof should be contained within a certified or signed document, that micro-credentials should be owned by the learner, they should be shareable, portable, and stackable or combinable into larger credentials or qualifications. They're also underpinned by quality assurance following agreed standards. Within that definition of micro-credentials, we also have defined the essence of what we call an EU standard for micro-credentials. You might think of this as a diploma supplement, but for micro-credentials, but you won't see any language about supplements here, because we think of micro-credentials primarily as digital documents, and within the context of a digital document, the supplement style information is essentially integrated into the main credential. So we imagine it as having a wealth of information, including identification of the learner, title, country of issuer, awarding body, also information about the notional workload, the level, the learning outcomes, type of assessment, quality assurance of the credential. And then there are other optional pieces of information, such as grade, mode of identity and assessment, etc., etc. So the idea, first of all, is that micro-credentials, as documents given to students, should be documented in a standardized way. Apart from this, there are a number of other building blocks, which include alignment with the qualification frameworks, a set of QA standards, alignment with the ECTS, solutions for recognition and portability, solutions for platforms that provide and promote courses, and a set of EU incentives to stimulate the uptake. All of these building blocks have been laid out in a roadmap of actions that started last year and should take us through to 2024. So there's, let's say, a very, very practical set of activities that should take us forward for promoting this. First of all, in terms of the common and transparent definition and the EU standard for micro-credentials, what is happening right now is that the Commission is doing wide consultations with member states, labour market actors, and also EHEA countries, and that should lead to a proposal for a council recommendation on micro-credentials towards the end of this year. We would hope that that would be adopted by ministers next year as a council recommendation, and we would further hope that it would be integrated into the 2024 communique of the Bologna Ministerial Conference. Second action is alignment to national and European qualification frameworks. And basically the plan here is to discuss this in detail with member states through 2022, and then adapt national qualification frameworks as needed to be able to incorporate micro-credentials very, very concretely within qualification frameworks. My understanding is that Ireland is actually the first country in Europe to already allow for micro-credentials in its qualification framework. So I'm not sure there's too much for you to do in terms of this action. Next action we have is quality assurance. And quality assurance is about understanding both within higher education and within vocational education, how current tools can be adapted to deal with QA issues. So the EU is funding a project called Microball that is doing a lot of analytical work in terms of higher education, And there's also exploring how ECAVET and ISO standards can be used within vocational processes. Once the results of these initial analysis are done, from 2022, the idea is to publish recommendations on how to adapt QA frameworks to fully incorporate micro-credentials. To give you an idea of the types of issues we are looking at, we're asking questions such as, is program accreditation scalable in the context of micro-credentials? If a micro-credential is derived from an accredited program, does it need to be reaccredited as an individual micro-credential? We're also looking at checking whether, let's say, the recognizability of a micro-credential should be a factor of its quality assurance rating. So there's a number of very interesting quality debates to be had within this micro-credentials, but all of it extends from current QA frameworks. Nobody is talking about creating a brand new QA framework just for micro-credentials. Next part of this is ECTS. Until 2022, exploring how ECTS applies to micro-credentials, and from 2022, adapting the ECTS Users Guide to better integrate micro-credentials. The interesting part here is that the EU will also be exploring how other credit systems could be adapted to education sectors beyond higher education. So it's clear that to make micro-credentials recognizable and stackable, they need to be based on a credit system. And that credit system needs to be based on concepts of workload and of learning outcomes taken together, which means that we are talking about that we would need all micro-credentials to use credit systems which either are ECTS natively or ECTS-like. And part of the agenda is really to figure out how micro-credentials outside higher education could use credit systems that interoperate with the higher education ones. In terms of recognition, the idea will be to consult with ENIC-NARICS to discuss how they could support the recognition of micro-credentials over the course of this year. Next year, the idea is to release guidelines to ensure quicker recognition processes for micro-credentials, and from 2023 to also adapt existing instruments. In terms of recognition, the main philosophy here is that micro-credential recognition needs to be scalable, because the amount of work that will come from micro-credentials is far, far larger than what we get from degrees, simply because there are many, many, many more micro-credentials. So the idea here is to adapt recognition instruments to allow for at least semi-automatic recognition that is strongly digitally enabled to be able to deal with these increased volumes and increased complexities. Storage and portability, we want to allow individuals to be able to, first of all, store their own micro-credentials and also to carry their micro-credentials with them throughout life and present them in different contexts. And for that, the Europass digital credentials infrastructure will be a key element, as well as the set of projects that are around the European Student Card initiative. I'll talk a little bit more about how these are relevant to micro-credentials in a few minutes. In terms of lifelong learning, one of the very, very important policy priorities is to ensure better permeability between education and training sectors. So it's very explicit that we want people to carry vet credentials to higher education and vice versa. We want higher education credentials to be used in adult learning contexts, etc., etc. There's also a link here to recognition of prior learning and validation of informal and non-formal learning, and there's also a link to how micro-credentials could be used by guidance services to increase the range of learning opportunities available to people who need it. At national level, There will be significant consultations involving relevant stakeholders over the next years. The Commission will be nudging member states to upgrade regulatory frameworks to take advantage of the opportunities presented by micro-credentials, and will also be working on various kinds of micro-credential pilots through EU funding schemes. Which brings us to the uptake. The EU will be significantly supporting micro-credentials through Erasmus Plus, as well as via structural funds. It will also be funding projects for the development of sustainable business models for the provision of micro-credentials, and it will be consulting significantly with public employment services, social partners, and let's say the employment state of stakeholders to see how micro-credentials can, let's say, directly serve the labor market and policies around retraining and so on. Finally, at the very policy level, there will be a number of peer learning events coming up for member states to be able to trade information about what they've been learning on micro-credentials. So that gives you the idea of the scope of the micro-credential strategy as a whole. And in a way, and what's happening really now is that 2021 is a time for intensive consultations leading to this proposal for a council recommendation in December 2021. Within all of this, the Europass plays quite a central role. So, as mentioned earlier, the Europass is the Commission's updated tool, which is meant to move from a CV template to a single online portal for individuals to manage their learning and their career opportunities. So the Europass is made up of 4 main components, the first of which is an interoperability mechanism, which is a set of technical tools to allow for institutions, member states, employers, and students to exchange information between them on skills and qualifications in a secure manner. In terms of user-facing tools, the first is the Eportfolio, which was described earlier as a kind of LinkedIn profile. It is a kind of LinkedIn profile with the difference that the Europass has no social media or element to it. So your Eportfolio is yours, it's completely private, and it's there for you to manage your skills and opportunities. Linked to that, we have an information provision element. And the information provision element, first of all, recommends courses and jobs to you on the basis of your profile. So the idea is that we actually mine your profile, understand what skills you have, try and understand also what your job aspirations are, and provide tailored recommendations to you as an individual on the basis of that. Again, it's important to note that we do mine your data, but your data is only mined for you. So we are not, let's say, doing big data analysis and pulling and aggregating people's data to pull other recommendations from them. The last part of this is the European digital credentials infrastructure. And digital credentials are meant to provide for verified documents certifying the learning or employment activities you have done throughout your career. So Europass digital credentials is quite central to the skills agenda, and this importance is reflected by its position in a number of EU documents. So you'll find references to it in the Communication on Completing the European Education Area by 2025, in the Europass decision. You'll also find reference to creating a European data space on skills and qualifications within the European data strategy, and it also forms a key action of the European skills agenda. The basis of all of this is our data model for learning, which we call the Europass learning model. So what we have been working on is creating a single data model to describe any kind of course in Europe, and by any kind I mean from pre-primary to adult education and everything in between, and to also describe the credentials that are issued to people at the end of those courses. The model can be used for credentials, it can be used for diploma supplements, it can be used for comparability statements, it can be used for micro-credentials, it can be used for any type of information you want to exchange digitally in the educational sphere. This data model, I'll just present it from a credentials perspective. So if I'm issuing a credential to a student, the credential will contain information about the issuer of the credential. It'll include information about who the credential is being issued. It will contain a secure digital signature that proves it has not been tampered with, as well as metadata such as issuing date and so on. When we're talking about the information about the person, we can make several different types of claims about a person. So we can describe claims related to activities. And activities we just define as something you have done. So you might have completed 150 hours of coursework, 100 hours of apprenticeship. You might have completed 4 years working as a welder. You might have attended this webinar. Activities are things you have done, but all we are saying when we talk about an activity is that you have done something. We're not necessarily claiming that you've learned anything while doing it. We're just saying that you've done it. If we want to claim that you have learned something, we have a concept of achievements. And under achievements, we speak about learning outcomes and assessments. So an example of an achievement might be the achievement of the German qualification of being a painter. That would include a number of learning outcomes. To simplify it drastically, you probably have the learning outcome of the skill of painting if you're a painter. And how do we know you've achieved that learning outcome? We know you've achieved that learning outcome because you did an assessment where you got a grade B in your final examination. Aside from stuff you've done, we also can talk about things you are entitled to. So entitlements are a key part of the model, and we can look at entitlements that are entitlements to employment-related elements or educational-related elements. So for example, we can say that the German qualification as a painter entitles you to work as an independent painter. It effectively entitles you to the license of a painter. We might say that a medical degree entitles you to membership of the medical chamber. Or as it works in a lot of countries, a law degree entitles you not to membership of the bar, but it entitles you to do the bar examination. Similarly, if we're talking in terms of micro-credentials, we might say that earning one micro-credential entitles you to apply for recognition of a larger macro-credential. Finally, we have attestations. And attestations are a special class of credential which say something about another credential. So, for example, you could issue an attestation saying that this credential is recognized as a qualification in Finland, which would be one way to represent a comparability statement. So this data model is the core of everything we do, and this data model is then implemented in a number of different services. So we talk about digital credentials in terms of the European digital credentials infrastructure. The reason that we've had to build everything nearly from scratch to create a true European framework for this. So first of all, there's the Europass learning model, which I've just presented. And along with that, we have authored a set of service standards. And service standards are essentially standards on how institutions should issue credentials. Another standard, which is a wallet standard, which describes how credentials should be stored by software providers. and a third standard, which is a viewer verifier standard, which describes how credentials should be checked for authenticity and how they should be viewed. Once we've written those standards, the first implementer of those standards is the Commission itself inside the Europass. And we are running a set of services which allow you, first of all, to sign and issue credentials, and any institution is essentially able to just log into Europass and start issuing credentials. Secondly, we are running a wallet where every user of the Europass has a credentials wallet where they may securely store their credentials ad infinitum. At the moment, we have 1.5 million wallet users, which already makes Europass the largest credential wallet provider in the world. We have a viewer, which allows you to render, verify, and share those credentials. And behind all of this, we have an accreditation database that checks whether credentials were actually issued by accredited institutions. The last part of all of this is software and support component. So the Commission does not want to be in the business of running the only credential wallet in Europe, and it does not want to be in the business of running the only credential issuing service in Europe. Actually, we hope that we would be issuing less than 5% of credentials in Europe a few years from now. The idea is that we would hope that student information system providers would integrate the ability to issue credentials directly into their systems. And also, we would hope that various wallet providers would emerge across Europe in the coming years. And those wallet providers could be anything from national employment services to corporations such as LinkedIn to more learning portfolio providers. So the whole point of this three-pillar approach is to really provide an ecosystem of interoperable, verifiable credentials. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what the infrastructure looks like, this just shows you all the, let's say, individual software and standards components that make up the Europass. I won't dive into this in a lot of detail, except to point out that also a key part of this is the ETCI code library, where we will be open sourcing all the software that the Commission has produced within the Europass for digital credentials, so that it can be reused by other institutions. And that during 2021, we will be issuing something we call the Awarding Body Archive Wallet. And the Awarding Body Archive Wallet will basically be a set of tools that would allow educational institutions to run our software natively on their own infrastructure and would allow them to store the credentials they have issued for students for archiving purposes. We have been piloting this for during 2020, and we piloted it in 18 member states across Europe. We've now moved from piloting to what we call an early adoption phase, which means that anyone can issue digital credentials now through the Europass platform, but we are not promoting that ability heavily yet, while we are, let's say, understanding more about member states' requirements, and critically, while we're waiting for the translation of the platform into every EU language. We will move from early adoption into, let's say, full promoted public production sometime within the next 3 months. That deadline, as you might appreciate, is constantly in flux based on COVID and EU budget considerations. So enough talking about all of this. Let me just give you a quick demo of what a credential actually looks like and how it's integrated in the Europass. So if you log into your Europass, I have my profile here, and within my profile, I have a section called my library. And my library can be used to store different types of documents. I can store different CVs I've sent to employers. I can store cover letters. and I can also store certificates and diplomas. You see here that next to certificates and diplomas, I have a wallet address. You can think of this wallet address as kind of like a bank account number, but for credentials. And if I give this wallet address to an institution, they will be able to directly deposit credentials into my library. There's no need for me to upload them directly. If I click on one of these credentials, I'll choose this one here, I will be able to see the visual representation of the credential. Now, we keep this, let's say, certificate type credential here, and an institution can customize this any way they like. But the real magic of this is when you click on credential details. Hopefully my internet connection will cooperate. Here we go. So when I'm looking at the credential details, I can really see everything that is written within a credential. You see I still have the summary of the credential here. The authentication and verification check is still ongoing, so I'll present that in a moment. But on the left, you can see these data concepts I was talking about. So I can see all the information about the credential owner. I can see details about what they have achieved. In this case, a Master of Science in Civil Engineering. And we can see that this Master of Science in Civil Engineering, I can see detailed information about the grade and even the grading scheme in the country. I can also see what we call sub-achievements, which essentially in this case are details of what the student achieved in every credit during that time. I can see details of all the learning outcomes that were achieved, ECTS, qualification level, etc., etc. I appreciate the interface could be better, and it is something that we're working on. And if I dive into it, I see that I find the individual grades received in every single credit. So it's important to say that we don't require anyone to provide all of this information, but we provide the possibility to provide all of this information. And by doing so, in a way, we provide a digital possibility to provide what you might call a diploma supplement on steroids. So hopefully the verification checks will have finished running. They have not. I will just jump back to my PowerPoint where I had the backup just in case this happened. So the last thing to mention here is the authenticity and verification checks. So one of the key concerns for us was to provide what we call verified credentials. We want to be sure that if a student is presenting these credentials to an employer, the employer can, within a couple of seconds, know that this is a valid credential and that they can concentrate on validating the content of the credential rather than what we might call the envelope of the credential. To do that, we built a very sophisticated verification infrastructure that can check 6 different things on a credential. So first of all, we can check format. And for checking format, it's just making sure the compulsory fields of a credential have been filled in. We have the ability to support many different formats. So any country in the Union can actually tell us we have for example, if there is an Irish template for a higher education degree, you can actually send us that type and we will check an Irish higher education degree against the compulsory fields defined by your own regulation or legislation. The second thing we check is the seal. And the seal is a special kind of digital signature that is issued by an organization. And first of all, a document can only be sealed by an organization that has been verified. And once a document is sealed, if it is edited in any way, this is immediately obvious and can be detected by our verification software. So by sealing it, we basically make the credential tamper-proof, and we verify that it really came from the organization that claims to have issued it. Thirdly, we can check that the person presenting the credential is the person it was actually issued to by comparing the information in the credential with that in their Europass profile. We can check if the credential was revoked, which means if the university or institution issuing it decides to cancel this credential for some reason, they can publish that cancellation notice to a special list, and we will be able to say that this credential has been revoked. We can check accreditation. And when we check accreditation, we check whether an institution issuing it was actually authorized to issue such a credential. Now, it's important to mention that Europass is meant for any kinds of credentials, not just accredited ones. So we have one type of credentials, which we call accredited credentials, and these are for any type of credential that is covered by a national license, university degrees, vocational qualifications, and any other protected types you have. If I'm issuing you a certificate of attendance for this webinar, clearly that isn't covered by an accreditation. So if as an issuer I don't claim that I am accredited, we will not run an accreditation check, and this would just appear as skipped. If you do claim to be accredited, we then will check against a new service we are calling the accreditation database, and we check if you are in the accreditation database. Where does the information for the accreditation database come from? Member states tell us which classes of credential are protected in their country and which institutions are authorized to issue them. The Commission makes no ruling on this whatsoever. We purely check against information provided to us by the member states. The last check we run is a check on whether a credential has expired. So, for example, especially in professional certifications, they have a habit of expiring after 2 or 3 years, and we can also check if that's expired. All of this ends up in a very simple tick box check of verified or not verified for the credential as a whole. Last bit to show you here is that all of this is managed via an online issuer, and this just gives you an idea of how people can create credentials. So as I mentioned, that our preference in the long term is that student information system providers integrate this directly into their systems, but absent that, we also have an online portal that allows you to build your own credentials. And you can do this via a purely online interface if you're issuing small batches of 15 to 20 credentials. You can also do it via Excel, where we have a customized Excel template. You enter all the student data and that gets transformed into credentials. You can also do it in a more techie way by uploading your data to us in an XML format, and we also then convert that to digital credentials. If you're there, I would be happy to answer any questions. I appreciate I went slightly over my time. Apologies for that, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Anthony. My goodness, that was such an informative presentation. Thank you so much. Really looking forward to the development of this project, and the summary you provided is just so informative. You know, the whole idea of the roadmap and where we're progressing to 2024, and then the demonstration of the particular project. And I think for those that work in between, you know, employment, in industry, in education, the benefits of it is immense. So thank you so much for that very informative presentation. Thank you so much. Now, I am just conscious of time, and Angela can come in if I'm wrong on this, but I think we're aiming for taking questions with Barbara and feedback at around 12 o'clock. So maybe we'll keep questions.
I think we can certainly.
Can you?
We'll be here till 12:30, 1:45 by the looks of it. It's no, okay. I don't think it's a problem if people can stay with us. So we can certainly move on through the presentation, but that there are 1 or 2 points perhaps Anthony might like to respond to in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see the chat, Roisin.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the
There's
couple of
Jerry
questions
there.
Yeah, indeed. I know Jerry had mentioned something about, the pace of change and is the project maybe moving ahead of local approaches and local governments, or have you any comments on just the time frame? And maybe when you're looking at that, I'll scan for some more questions, maybe just about the time frame, keeping on board, I suppose, like, for example, national countries on board to the European deadlines.
Okay, so if we're talking about, so first of all, I'll talk about the timelines. There isn't a large danger that the EU will progress faster than other member states of the EHEA in terms of micro-credentials. Micro-credentials were mentioned in the last communique. This microball project you saw mentioned as one of the key research sources which the EU is using, that's micro-credentials for Bologna. So there's a lot of close coordination going on between the Bologna groups and the Commission here. And when we talk about micro-credentials being mentioned in the 2024 communique, I would imagine that would be more the type of thing saying we recognize all the work that has already been done on micro-credentials, rather than saying we have to start working on micro-credentials. Let's say it is very, very integrated at micro-credential level. If we're talking Europass and Europass digital credentials, that then is an EU-only initiative and isn't really working within the wider Bologna group. Another question here about micro-credential assessments and psychomotor skills.
Yes.
Honestly, we are not getting into how you do assessments. So this is not something the agenda would look at. All that the agenda will say is that a micro-credential has to be assessed in terms of skills and has to define the precise types of skills that are there. I would argue that your question is more, let's say, linked to the overall skills policies, ESCO, etc. But the micro-credentials agenda will not be telling you how to assess. It'll just be telling you that it has to be assessed and you have to indicate the learning outcomes.
Very good. Yes, perfect. And then Carmel is a question there about getting a copy of the presentation. I'm sure those will be circulated as well. And if that would be okay. And just if anybody else has any other particular questions, I know I have a few questions myself, but that's neither here nor there. Just zooming down there. Yes. Yeah, just Jason there, really useful presentation from Anthony, greatly clarifies the status of micro-credentials European level. And Ethna again from Galway, just indicating it's a very informative presentation. Angela, is there anything else you wanted to bring in this particular area yourself?
Well, certainly what I would say from our position, Roisin, is that the digital credentials aspect of Europass is an area where we have yet to go. I think much of our effort certainly it relates to the Europass platform and promoting its existence to our Irish stakeholders at this particular point in time. But I have learned a lot so far this morning, and we have to get our heads around what's this whole work, and we are involved with the Microball project through the ENIC-NARICS and through QQI's work itself. So we will learn more about micro-credentials and also about digital credentials for Europass. So we will get there, but it is a long-term project. These are long-term ambitions, yes. I think, and we need resourcing, obviously, as well, because I have to put my hand up and say, this is my skill set is limited in relation to digital credentials. We're moving into an area of complex technologies, I think, and we certainly will need direction and we will need a lot of support in the coming years on this. But look, let's move, let's roll with it,
Yes, indeed. And I think what you've just said, the long term, and as you know, the government is currently working on a 10-year digital literacy strategy and adult skills, obviously, in that as well. And, is this something that could be looked at that? And how would this join in with the upskilling pathways initiatives at European level as well, and the frameworks that's in place for that?
Sorry, yeah, just the one thing is that we'll be looking at our application for Europass for 2021 to 2023, presumably in the first quarter of 2021. So we will be looking for funding to help us with this as well, and to begin this work.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I might just take another, if I'm still okay for time, just might take a couple of other pointers.
I just give us another few minutes, because I'm conscious it's Anthony is an hour at least ahead of us, so it certainly is coming up to his lunchtime, whatever about ours.
Oh yes, I understand. Yeah. Just Andrina and Carmel have a question there. Andrina's question is, and Anthony can probably see them there as well. How have job seekers responded to the visibility of the entire academic records? And Carmel inquiring just there regarding a certificate of achievement. Will this have to be verified by the traineeship program provider? Anthony, maybe.
You can.
Okay, so first of all, honestly, I'm afraid that we're in early days. I can't tell you how job seekers have responded to the visibility of academic records, simply because all of our piloters have chosen to basically reproduce existing academic records in a digital format. We've given a lot of scope to expand the type and amount of information available, but mainly our piloters they're still digesting the additional information possibilities. If you look at how learners have responded to digitization generally, as you probably won't be surprised that the summary, we did some focus groups, we did some evaluation, and honestly, you could pretty much summarize it as about time. So that was the main thing they told us. They're very happy to have it digital, but we're still in early days of seeing more wider academic records included. Regarding certificates of attendance. So again, we just provide a framework for you to issue any type of certificate you want and to have it verified by anybody you like. But let me just give an example. You can have the certificate of attendance issued by the traineeship program provider themselves. After all, they are the ones that are guaranteeing you attended. Maybe the apprenticeship is woven into a wider program. So maybe your, let's say, end educational qualification would then include inside it the certificate of attendance from the provider. So one of the key elements here is that you can collect different certificates from different parts of your own institution or other institutions and collect them or stack them into larger credentials, if that's something you want to do. I'll just keep going through the chat if you don't stop me.
Yes, brilliant.
So in terms of a single platform for the development of micro-credentials at EU level, I assume you're meaning, are we going to create a single software platform that allows you to host all micro-credentials? This is one of the things that is honestly being discussed very, very actively over 2021. At the moment, the thinking seems to be more on the side of creating lists of trusted micro-credential providers and then letting various projects and the market actually create hubs for those micro-credentials, and not necessarily trying to create a single EU hub for absolutely everything. I should qualify that by saying, though, that Europass itself has a core search which pulls on data from member states. There are projects under Erasmus for micro-credentials in higher education, especially linked to what they call the Common Micro-Credentials Framework. So what I think we will be seeing is the EU stimulating actually a whole ecosystem of various micro-credential portals. As I said, though, that one, and there's a reason it's not in the roadmap, there are a lot of different visions of how that will eventually end up, and we should see some clarity towards the end of the year on that.
Just
if an institution was interested in adopting micro-credentials in advance, can they? So generally here, if we're talking micro-credentials generally, then you'll already see a lot of funding under Erasmus, which can be used for micro-credentials. A lot of the European university alliances use micro-credentials very, very strongly as the means of exchange of courses within those alliances. So even under the last generation of Erasmus, in the last year, we were seeing a lot of micro-credential projects coming, and the Commission is very strongly encouraging the development of more here. In terms of the 18 piloting countries, that wasn't so much micro-credentials as digital credentials more widely. For digital credentials, there's no specific funding program for implementation. The 18 piloting countries were all volunteers using their own funding, but in the coming period, there's a whole host of tools that can be used to encourage development of systems. So one thing I didn't speak about is that the Commission is under the European data strategy, is going to be encouraging member states to create, I think they're called national digital credential transformation strategies, something grand like that. But for these digital credential transformation strategies, the idea would be that you would say, what would an Irish national credentialing platform look like in conjunction with Europass? And for that, you could use ESF funding, next generation EU funding, CEF funding, etc., etc. And these are, let's say, then for larger projects where we're talking, let's say, low-digit millions, rather than the types of Erasmus budgets we usually speak about. Was the creation of micro-credentials and the stackable approach linked to learning outcomes involved in the pilot? Short answer, yes. So you will already see some support for micro-credentials and stacking within the Europass digital credentials framework. But at the moment, it's a very manual thing. So you can attach micro-credentials within a larger micro-credential. We are planning, as part of the strategy, to do a lot more work on that and to, let's say, create a whole host of tools that would support creating, exchanging, recognizing micro-credentials and stacking them. So we already provide some support, but there's a lot more to come in this space. Unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly what, because the whiteboarding meetings for that still haven't happened.
Perfect. Perfect. That's brilliant. And then a question probably for myself, maybe. Jennifer has mentioned there with regard to all these developments will need to inform the senior cycle review here in Ireland and the development of delivery. And I think, Jennifer, you're absolutely right. I suppose the whole of person, the whole of government approach, and maybe when this is being rolled out at a national level, that's something could be looked at. And again, just Anthony, one question on that. It is a credential system based on universities and degrees, certificates. Will it cover primary education as well, or is that something slightly different?
No, absolutely everything. So
wow.
That's the short answer. Any type of credential issued to you for any learning. It could even cover your graduation from the Scouts. So it's really meant for everything.
That is going to be just so fantastic. You know, having 3 teenagers myself who just received some of their certificates were sort of asking me, is that not on my phone? You know, just when you've grown up digital, you expect everything to be digitalized, you know, so that's great news. Angela, what about now? Is there anything else you'd like to cover on that, or you'd like to come in on?
No,
Angela?
Certainly. I think I would, Anthony has opened quite a few doors here today in terms of new material and information for for all of us here today, and we've lot to learn, but I think we are very keen on participating and engaging in whatever projects and options we might have. So there's more to follow. That's all I can say in this particular area. And I have to say, Anthony's presentation has been superb.
Absolutely.
So